What is the biggest mistake of your life? For me, it was trusting a promise with no paperwork, no signatures, nothing but empty words on a winter night. I spent over $150,000 paying off my parents' debt because I believed that house would eventually be mine. 5 years later, without saying a single word to me, they transferred the deed to my older brother, as if everything I did never even happened. Do you think I could just sit back and accept that? Before getting into the details of the story, could you leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from? Just type the name of your city or country in the comment section below. I want to know how far my story has reached. The story I'm telling today happened over 2 years ago, and to this day, I still remember exactly how it all went down. I'm Grant, 31 years old, a software engineer in Portland, Oregon. Right now, I live alone in a small apartment in the Pearl District, right downtown. It's nothing fancy, just one bedroom and a window looking down at a street full of coffee shops. But it's the only place in the world where I feel like I truly belong. Nobody can take it from me, and nobody can take advantage of me in there. I love my job. Code, systems, lines of logic that either run right or run wrong, it's all completely clear. If you write it right, the program runs right. There's no room for ambiguity, and nobody makes you guess what they're thinking. I like that world because it's transparent and fair. It's just a shame that life outside the screen never operates that cleanly. And my family is the clearest proof of that. There was a time when I believed they loved me, believed we were a truly close-knit family. Then, 2 years ago, I realized a bitter truth. That love wasn't unconditional like I thought it was. And when I realized that, I also realized something even more painful. In their eyes, I was never truly a part of this family. I was just the guy who paid the bills. My dad's name is Wendell, 63 years old, a rigid man who always believes he's right. Before retiring, Dad worked as a foreman at a printing plant for almost 30 years. He's not the type to show emotion, but he has an unshakable core belief. Family must stand together, and it's the children's duty to take care of their parents in their old age. My mom's name is Sheila, 59 years old. She's much softer than Dad, but she's also incredibly good at manipulating people's emotions in a way so subtle you barely even notice. Mom was always talking about love, about sacrifice, about how family members need to lift each other up. When I was little, Mom was the gentlest person, always hugging me whenever I was sad. Growing up, I slowly came to understand that her gentleness wasn't always love. Sometimes, it was just a tool to push me into doing exactly what Mom wanted. Then there's Colton, my older brother, 33 years old. Colton is the kind of guy who can make you like him from the very first time you meet. Tall, good-looking, friendly smile, and a confidence that's always written right on his face. My brother calls himself an independent music producer, but in all these years, I've never seen him finish a single decent project. Colton spends most of his time sitting in coffee shops, talking about these grand projects in his head, or hanging out with friends, living a life completely free of financial worry, because Mom and Dad were always there to bail him out. My parents had this relentless belief that Colton would eventually make it big. Colton just needs a little more time, they said that my entire childhood. I heard it so much I had it memorized. As for me, it was different. I was the one who was just expected to be fine, to carry the weight, to never ever be allowed to collapse. I got used to it a long time ago, so used to it that it felt normal. But I never expected that exact role to push me into a trap with no way out. It all started on a December evening in 2019. That afternoon, Mom called and told me to pack up and come home right away, said it was urgent. When I drove from the Pearl District down to Gresham and walked through the door, I knew right away something was wrong. The whole house was quiet, but a heavy kind of quiet, not a peaceful one. Mom was sitting on the sofa, clutching a tissue in her hand, eyes red like she'd just been crying. Dad stood next to her with his arms crossed, his face weighed down. They both looked at me like I was the only person who could save them from something massive. I pulled up a chair and sat opposite them, already feeling uneasy. Looking straight into Mom's eyes, I lowered my voice and asked, "What's going on?" Hearing my question, Mom grabbed my hand. Her hand was shaking a little. After a moment of silence, Mom looked at me and said, "We're in big trouble, Grant. The bank is about to foreclose on the house." Hearing her words, I was stunned. Letting go of her hand, I asked, "How did it get to this point? I thought we were doing fine." Dad sighed, avoiding my eyes. He took off his glasses and slowly replied, "We borrowed some money to invest, but things didn't go the way we planned. Right now, we owe $115,000, and if we can't pay it back, they're going to take the house." That number made me freeze for a moment before I could regain my composure. I turned to Mom, then back to Dad, waiting for one of them to say something else to lighten the blow. But nobody said a word. Right then, Mom squeezed my hand again, tears rolling down her face. Looking at me with pleading eyes, she said, "Can you help us? It's about $2,600 a month just for a few years. And then, later on, this house will be yours. That will be your share." That sentence echoed in my head. I glanced over at Colton, who hadn't opened his mouth once since this all started. My brother was leaning back in his chair, fingers swiping on his phone screen, acting as if this whole thing had absolutely nothing to do with him. Seeing that, I asked my parents, "What about Colton? What's his plan?" Hearing his name, Colton looked up with a slight smile. My brother shrugged and replied, "I can't handle a payment like that right now, Grant. But I promise you, I'll never fight you for the house." Hearing that, I just sat there in silence. I'm not the kind of guy who trusts easily. But this was my mom and dad, my own flesh and blood brother. If I turned my back on them, they'd lose the house, and they'd have nowhere else to go. That night, I drove back to my apartment. The room was as quiet as ever, but my mind wouldn't stop racing for a second. I opened my laptop, pulled up a spreadsheet, and the numbers just jumped out at me. $2,600 a month was no small amount. $115,000 was even worse. I could make it work, but the price was sleeping less, giving up trips, and grinding in front of a screen on nights that were supposed to be my own. Even so, this was my family. I asked myself if I even had the right to say no to them. I tossed and turned in bed until late at night. I kept thinking about Mom's red eyes, about Dad's heavy expression, and about Colton sitting there all evening without offering a single word of help. Then, at exactly 2 in the morning, my phone screen lit up. A message from Colton. I picked it up to read. My older brother wrote, "Grant, help Mom and Dad out. If they lose the house, they'll have nowhere to go. I can't chip in right now, but I promise I won't fight you for the house." I read that text over and over, trying to find even a hint of deceit in it. Colton might be lazy, he might be irresponsible, but he was never greedy. My brother made a promise, and so I believed him. The next morning, I called the bank and set everything up. Exactly a week later, I made the first transfer to save the house. When I hit send on that payment, I had no idea I had just stepped into the longest stretch of my life. After that first transfer, time slipped by month, payment by payment. Every month I sent out $2,600. Including principal and interest over almost 5 years, the total came to $158,000. To scrape that together, I took on extra freelance projects, worked late into the night, skipped vacations, and cut out every unnecessary expense. I turned down dinners with coworkers and brushed off trips my friends invited me on. I lived so minimally that sometimes even I felt my life was just an endless loop of working and paying off debt. But I told myself it was worth it. Every time I hit send on a transfer, I pictured the day the house would belong to me. The day I would walk in there and no longer feel like I was just the one carrying the burden. It would be the reward for everything I sacrificed, the proof that I did the right thing. Throughout that whole time, my parents always seemed so grateful. Every time I visited on the weekend, Mom would hug me so tight. Looking at me with such proud eyes, she'd say, "Thank you, Grant. You are the rock of this family." Hearing that, I just nodded off, even though deep down I was glad to be acknowledged. Colton was different. My brother wasn't very emotional about it, but every time we met, he'd pat me on the back and give me this satisfied smirk. He'd say, "You're doing great." I heard that sentence dozens of times over those few years. Strangely enough, the more I heard it, the more it bothered me. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Something just felt off. A vague sense of unease kept hovering over me that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then one day, I found out the truth. That day started out as normal as any other. In early 2025, I drove down to Gresham unannounced. I didn't drop by my parents' house as often anymore. But that day I needed to grab a stack of old insurance papers still registered to this address. The Portland sky that day was gray and damp as usual, and I didn't think much of it, just planning to go in, grab the papers, and head right out. The front door was unlocked. I pushed it open and walked in. The whole house was dead empty. It looked like Mom had just gone out or was in the backyard. I went straight to the kitchen, where she usually left the mail on the counter. Just as I guessed, a pile of envelopes was sitting there, some already opened, some still sealed. I flipped through each one, looking for an envelope with my name on it. Then I saw a white envelope stamped by the county property tax office. I stopped. The recipient address didn't have my parents' names on it. It read, Owner, Colton Holloway. I frowned reading that name, my heart beating just a little faster. I picked up the envelope, pulled out a chair, sat down, and tore it open. Inside was the property tax notice, the kind of paperwork every homeowner gets every year. But the name on it wasn't Dad's, and it wasn't Mom's either. It was my brother's name. I stared blankly at the paper, sitting in dead silence for a long time. Colton was the owner of this house. That's impossible. I quickly flipped through the pages, desperately searching for an explanation. And then I saw it. A property deed transfer signed 6 months ago. 6 months ago. Right exactly after I paid off the final debt. The house that I spent $158,000 to keep, the house that I sacrificed years of my youth to save for my family, was now in my brother's name, belonging entirely to Colton. Sitting in that quiet kitchen, I realized I had been completely scammed for 5 straight years. I just kept sitting there, the tax notice clutched tight in my hand, the anger rising up slowly but surely. I did everything for this house, for this family, and they lied to my face so blatantly. I decided not to leave. They were going to face me today. A few minutes later, I heard the gate open out in the yard. My parents had just gotten back from the neighbor's house, still laughing and talking, until they walked in and saw me standing in the middle of the living room, holding the letter. Mom froze. Looking at me, then at the paper, she asked, Grant, why didn't you call before coming over? I held the paper right up to their faces. Staring straight at both of them, I asked, explain this to me. Why is this house in Colton's name? Neither of them answered right away. Dad slowly took off his glasses, looking at me like he was calculating how to spin this. That silence made me even more certain I wasn't seeing things. I fought down the lump in my throat and went on, You promised me. You said when I paid off the debt, this house would be mine. Hearing that, Mom let out a sigh. Stepping closer to me, she kept her voice really gentle and said, Grant, you already have your own place. Colton is trying to build his career. He needs somewhere stable. And we also need someone close by to take care of us when we get older. That actually made me laugh, but there wasn't an ounce of joy in it. I threw the paper onto the table, turning to look at Dad, waiting for him to say something different. He just stood there with his arms crossed. A moment later, Dad said to me, You need to be a bit more understanding of your brother. I stared at Dad for a second and asked, Understanding? What do you want me to understand? That I paid $158,000 over 5 years to save this house, just so it could belong to Colton now? Right at that moment, Colton walked out of his room, holding a can of beer. My brother leaned against the door frame, letting out a casual smirk, and said, Why are you getting so worked up, Grant? I need a place to live more than you do right now. You've got your own apartment, and I don't have anything. Hearing that, I clenched my fists. Looking my brother dead in the eye, I shot back. You don't have a house, but it's not because you never had a chance. It's because you never even bothered to try. What have you done for the past 5 years, besides sitting in coffee shops looking for inspiration? Colton shrugged, taking a sip of his beer like what I just said didn't matter at all. My brother replied, I don't have to prove anything to you. The point is, it's not like you lost anything. You still have your house, you're still doing fine, and this family still needs someone to hold on to this place. I turned to my parents, feeling like I was being cornered from all sides. Trying to keep my voice from shaking, I asked, So I'm just the ATM for this family then? And once the job's done, I just get tossed aside? Mom frowned, her voice getting noticeably sterner. She looked at me like I was a spoiled child and said, Don't talk like that, Grant. You're being selfish. That word selfish made me laugh out loud again, this time out of pure fury. I took a step back, looking at all 3 of them in the room, and said, Selfish? You guys literally begged for my help. You said if it weren't for me, the family would lose everything. You promised this house would be mine, and now I'm the selfish one? The room went dead silent for a few seconds. Then, As if they had rehearsed this beforehand, Mom lowered her voice and said, "You're a part of this family, Grant. Family members take care of each other. Without you, we would have lost this house a long time ago. So what's wrong with you helping out your parents?" Dad chimed in, his voice dropping low. He looked at me and said, "We are a family, Grant. Isn't everything you do supposed to be to help your own flesh and blood? If you really loved us, you wouldn't be counting every single penny like this." I ground my teeth. They were backing me into a corner, turning me into the villain in a story where I was the victim. I looked straight at Dad and asked, "So loving you means I have to sacrifice unconditionally, while Colton does absolutely nothing and gets everything?" Hearing that question, Mom scowled and replied, "Colton is your older brother. He'll be the one taking care of us later on." I smirked. I had heard enough to know they were never going to look at this fairly. Scanning them one last time, I said, "I get it now. In your eyes, I was never really a part of this family. I'm just the guy who pays the bills." With that, I turned around and walked out the door. Not a single one of them called me back. As I got into my car and started the engine, I knew something had finally snapped, and this time it was never going to be fixed. I barely slept that entire night, and by morning I knew exactly what I was going to do. I called Devin Pruitt, an old college friend who was now a financial dispute lawyer in Portland. Devin picked up after a few rings. Hearing my voice, Devin exclaimed, "Grant, long time no see. What's going on?" I didn't beat around the bush. Gripping the phone a little tighter, I said, "I want to sue my own family." The other end of the line went dead silent for a few seconds. Then Devin asked slowly, "Wait, what did you just say? Your family?" I let out a long breath and replied, "Yeah. They conned me out of $158,000. I have the bank transfer receipts. I want that money back." Devin was quiet for a moment, probably weighing the options. Finally, Devin said, "Listen, Grant, this isn't going to be easy. Without a written loan agreement, it's really tough. But if you can prove there was a promise made and you relied on that promise to pay up, we have a shot. In legal terms, it's called promissory estoppel. Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this?" Hearing Devin's words, I thought about that silent kitchen, about Colton's name on the tax notice, about the 5 years I spent working my ass off. After almost a minute of silence, I told Devin, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." After getting my confirmation, Devin told me to bring all the bank statements to the office next week. As I hung up, I knew I had just crossed a line of no return. A few days after the paperwork was filed with the court, my parents and Colton showed up right at my apartment. I had expected this. I had been ignoring a ton of their calls and texts, and the court had already sent the notice to my parents' house. When I opened the door, Dad was standing there with a stony face. Mom looked visibly anxious, and Colton hung back, his hands shoved in his pockets. Mom stepped in first. Looking around the apartment before turning to me, Mom said, "Grant, why are you doing this to us?" I crossed my arms, leaning against the kitchen counter. Looking right at Mom, I replied, "I gave you a chance to explain. But instead of telling the truth, you chose to lie to me. If you don't pay me back my $158,000, I'm taking this all the way." Hearing that, Mom sighed and stepped closer. Placing a hand on my arm like she was coaxing a stubborn child, Mom said, "Grant, family matters should stay within the family. Dragging your parents to court, what will outsiders think of you?" I gently brushed her hand off. That comment didn't soften me up one bit. I gave a dry laugh and said, "What do I care about what outsiders think? I slaved away for 5 years to pay off this family's debt, and then you just hand the house over to Colton without a single word. If you don't see anything wrong with that, why on earth should I care about anyone else?" Just then, Dad spoke up, his voice deep and irritated. He glared at me and said, "Do you really want to blow this out of proportion? Just for a few bucks?" His words made the anger inside me flare up. I dropped my arms, took a step forward, and demanded, "A few bucks? It's $158,000. That's 5 years of my youth, all the opportunities I missed out on, hundreds of nights I spent grinding away instead of resting. You call that a few bucks?" My parents glanced at each other. I could clearly see they realized playing soft wasn't going to work anymore. And then their whole attitude completely shifted. Dad crossed his arms, gave me a cold stare, and said, "Fine. If you want to drag this family to court, then we'll see you in court." I stared at Dad for a long time, And what I felt inside in that moment wasn't anger, but a hollow emptiness. They would rather face off against their own son in front of a judge than admit they were wrong. I nodded slowly and said, "Then I'll see you in court." The air in the apartment grew thick. Mom looked like she wanted to say something else, but ultimately just shook her head, pulled Dad's arm, and they headed for the door. Colton was the last one out, not saying a single word to me. As the door clicked shut, I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. There was no going back now. On the first day of court, I walked into the courtroom with a faint shred of hope that justice would be on my side. But just a few hours in, I realized things were nowhere near as easy as I thought. My parents sat at the defendant's table, Colton right beside them, looking strangely calm, as if my brother was absolutely certain he was going to win. Their lawyer opened with a simple but sharp argument. Standing up to face the judge, the lawyer said, "Your Honor, my clients never signed any written agreement with the plaintiff. Mr. Holloway voluntarily supported his family for 5 years without any binding conditions. That $158,000 was a form of familial support, not a loan. Demanding it back after all these years is completely baseless." Listening to how they twisted everything, I felt sick to my stomach, but forced myself to sit still. Devin put a hand on my shoulder, signaling me to stay calm. When it was Dad's turn to speak, he stood up calmly. Looking toward the judge, Dad said, "Grant is my son. He knew perfectly well the family was struggling and voluntarily helped us. We never promised that the house would belong to him." That sentence made me turn to look at Dad, but he avoided my eyes. Mom's next to him and nodded, her eyes tearing up as if she were the one who had been betrayed. Dabbing her eyes with a tissue, Mom said, "We have always loved Grant, and yet now he's suing his own parents just for money." I saw a few people in the courtroom shake their heads. The feeling of being looked at like some greedy money grabber weighed heavily on me. Colton was the last to stand up. My brother glanced at me for a second before turning to the judge. Looking completely unfazed, Colton said, "Your Honor, I have always respected my younger brother. But the house is our parents' property, and they decided to give it to me. I never promised my brother anything about owning the house." That lie slipped out of his mouth so smoothly, like it was the absolute truth. Hearing it made my hands go cold. Now it was Devin's turn to stand up and object. Turning toward the judge, Devin said, "Your Honor, my client paid off the entire debt of $115,000 to save the house. Without him, the Holloway family would have lost that home a long time ago." Hearing that, the judge flipped through the file, then looked up at Devin. He asked, "But counselor, do you have any documentation proving that this money was a loan and not a gift between family members?" I felt a surge of anxiety at that question because I knew the answer. We didn't have a contract. My parents sat on the other side of the room, keeping their faces perfectly composed. Colton had his arms crossed, leaning back in his chair without a shred of worry. My brother honestly believed there was nothing I could do. Right when I was stuck, Devin kept his voice calm and said, "Your Honor, we need more time to gather additional evidence. We request to postpone the trial for a few days." The judge thought for a moment, then nodded. He scheduled the next session for later that week. I exhaled, feeling a little lighter. Devin had just pulled me back from an obvious loss, but I knew if we didn't find something stronger, I'd walk away with nothing next time. As soon as we left the courthouse, Devin and I drove straight to the bank. We asked them to print the statements for all transactions related to the debt I had paid over the last 5 years. Every payment of $2,600 transferred steadily each month up to the very last one, totaling exactly $158,000. All came out of my account. That was crucial evidence, but it still wasn't enough. Devin flipped through each page of the statement. Setting the stack of papers on the table, Devin said, "Grant, you transferring the money is one thing, but to win, we need to prove there was an agreement between you and your family about the house. We need something that shows they promised." Hearing Devin's words, I tried to search my memory. A few seconds later, I replied, "I don't have a contract, but there's gotta be something. Mom and Dad promised me 100 times, and Colton," I stopped mid-sentence. Something had just clicked in my head. I remembered a text message. A text from Colton, sent at 2 a.m. 5 years ago. Right after that, I rushed back to my apartment, practically tossing my keys on the table as I ran into the bedroom. I tore through my drawers. Then I found it, the old phone I had left in there years ago. I plugged it in, praying it still worked. The screen flickered for a few seconds, then lit up. I opened the messages, scrolling to find the conversation with my brother, and it was still there. A message from 5 years ago, sent at exactly 2 a.m., right after Mom and Dad begged for my help. On the screen, my brother had written, "Grant, please help Mom and Dad out. If they lose the house, they'll have nowhere to stay. I can't chip in right now, but I promise I won't fight you for the house." I slumped to the floor, staring at those words. This was exactly what I needed. The proof that the whole family knew exactly what promise I was paying for. I took a screenshot, then called Devin right then and there. 3 days later, I walked into the courtroom for the second time, this time without a shred of hesitation. Colton sat at the defendant's table, looking as calm as ever. My parents sat next to him, their eyes slightly tense but still trying to look tough. They still believed I couldn't win. Devin stood up after being acknowledged by the judge, firm and decisive. With a voice full of confidence, Devin said, "Your Honor, we would like to submit a new piece of evidence. This is a text message sent by the defendant, Colton Holloway, to my client 5 years ago, at the exact time the family asked him to step up and pay off the debt." After saying that, Devin placed my old phone on the table, the screen literally showing the message. The entire courtroom fell silent as the judge leaned in to read it. Once he finished reading, the judge looked up, turned to Colton's lawyer, and asked, "Does the defense have anything to say about this evidence?" Colton let out a scoff. Shaking his head, my brother said, "What does a text message prove? Anyone can fake one of those. These days, there are tools to forge all of that. It was a psychological trick, and I felt genuinely worried." But Devin just gave a faint smile. Handing the judge another file, Devin said, "Your Honor, anticipating this, we requested a direct transcript of the text messages from the telecom provider, along with the timestamps. The content perfectly matches the message on the phone, and the time frame aligns exactly with the night the family asked my client to step in and save the house." Hearing that, Colton froze. For the first time in the entire trial, my brother's face showed sheer panic. The opposing lawyer leaned in and whispered something to Colton, but my brother couldn't keep his cool anymore. Just as their lawyer was trying to salvage the situation, Colton blurted out. Turning toward me, my brother said, "All right, I know Mom and Dad used your money to pay off the debt, but I didn't tell them to do that." The whole courtroom fell dead silent after that sentence. My parents hung their heads, not daring to look at me. Colton had just confessed the most important thing. My brother knew the truth from the very beginning, knew I had paid off the entire debt, and had stayed quiet for 5 whole years just to keep the entire house for himself. I turned to look at my brother, a faint smile appearing but without a hint of joy. Keeping my voice low, I said, "So you knew. You knew exactly what was going on, and you still let me pay your debt for you all those years." Colton didn't reply. My brother just stared down at the floor. Right after that, the judge banged his gavel, signaling for the trial to continue. And I knew the scales had just tipped completely in my favor. After reviewing all the evidence, the judge called the room to order and read the verdict. Looking down at the file, the judge declared, "The court finds that such sums of $158,000 paid by the plaintiff was not an unconditional gift, but was based on a clear promise from the defendant regarding the rights to the house. The plaintiff relied on that promise and suffered significant financial detriment over many years. This provides grounds to apply the principles of promissory estoppel and unjust enrichment." The judge paused for a few seconds, then continued, "Therefore, the court orders the defendants to fully reimburse the plaintiff the sum of $158,000, along with statutory interest. To ensure enforcement, the court places a lien on the house currently under the name of the defendant, Colton Holloway, until the amount is paid in full." Hearing the judge rule in my favor, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I had won. Not the house. I never really wanted that house anyway, but the money and the truth being rightfully acknowledged before a judge. When I opened my eyes, my parents still had their heads down without saying a word. Colton turned to me. Looking at me with a mix of anger and disappointment, my brother asked, "Grant, did you really want things to turn out like this?" I looked my brother dead in the eye. Standing up and gathering the stack of papers on the table, I replied, You never asked me that for the 5 years you let me pay off your debt. After saying that, I didn't wait for anyone's reaction. I walked out of the courtroom, and this time, no one chased after me. I had taken back what was mine, but as the courtroom doors closed behind me, I knew full well that the family I once knew was gone. A few months after the trial, everything wrapped up in a way that didn't make me happy, but made me feel lighter. To pay me the money from the judgment, Mom, Dad, and Colton were forced to sell the house in Gresham. The selling price was much higher than when I first took on the debt. After deducting all the fees and paying me the full $158,000 with interest, the rest went to them. They could use that money to rent a new place. Mom, Dad, and Colton still call and text me from time to time. I don't pick up and I don't reply. Not because I hate them, but because I just can't go back to how things were. Once trust is broken, it's incredibly hard to put it back together. I still keep an eye on them from a distance through social media. I still know they're doing fine, and I still care in my own way. But I just don't want to be around them anymore. Last week, I got a text from Colton. My brother wrote that he was sorry and that the family missed me. I read it, then put my phone down without replying. It's not because I haven't forgiven them. It's because I'm not sure if there's anything left to go back to. If you're listening to this story and see a bit of yourself in it, I want to leave you with 5 specific things. Not life lessons, but practical steps you can take right now. First, whenever money is tied to a promise within the family, get it in writing. A simple loan agreement signed by both sides, stating the exact amount and terms, will protect you way more than 100 empty promises. Second, if a relative asks you to take on debt to save an asset, demand that your name goes on the deed from day one. Don't wait until the end. Ownership is about whose name is on the paper, not what was spoken. Third, keep every single transfer receipt and save all related texts. Bank statements and an old text message might just be the thing that saves you years down the line, exactly like they saved me. Fourth, if you feel like a relationship is turning you into someone who's just there to pay the bills, speak up early and clearly. Don't suffer in silence, only to end up losing your money and your family all at once. Finally, if you think you've been scammed, talk to a lawyer before convincing yourself that it's a lost cause. The law still protects a lot of your rights, even without a formal contract. And a single consultation could open doors you thought were permanently closed. Also, after sharing all of this, I have a question for you guys. If you were in my shoes, would you keep your distance like I am, or would you choose to forgive and try to reconnect? Leave your thoughts below. I'd really love to hear them. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories. Thank you so much for listening to this long story. Bye for now, and I'll catch you next time.